back, Senator Cyr. There's so much going on. We hope you and your family had a small, wonderful Thanksgiving. But we know that there's just an enormous amount of information coming out of the State House right now with budgets about to be reconciled or reconciled. Tell us what's going on and what can the residents of Barnstable expect?
Sure, Paula. Good to be with you and nice to see you again. And yeah, Thanksgiving was pretty different this year. We didn't celebrate in my family. We kept it pretty small. We had hoped to sort of take a Thanksgiving walk, but the weather didn't cooperate. So a different tradition. But this continues to be a very challenging time. Across Cape Cod, across the Commonwealth, across the country. And so I want to make sure that we talk a lot about COVID-19, which has been affecting Barnstable in particular. In recent weeks, we've seen an uptick in cases that is just deeply alarming. But that does relate to the budget because the budget is sort of the biggest vehicle we pass every year. Was something that traditionally we would pass in the spring. So the House traditionally would do a budget in April. The Senate typically does our budget in May. Well, we put that off. And there was actually a lot of wisdom in waiting. When we were looking at projected revenues last spring and early summer, we thought there'd be a $6 billion revenue shortfall and about a $46 billion budget. That's a sizable chunk of revenue loss. Actually, now today, we know it's closer to a $3.5 billion loss, still substantial, but gives us a better sense. We were waiting, of course, to see what sort of federal action there would be, if any, on an additional stimulus, especially with dollars to state and local government. That hasn't happened. And so we proceeded, both the House and the Senate passed $46 billion budgets in November. And these really not only provide maintenance level funding to the myriad of state accounts, everything from public safety to health to environment and you name it. We fund municipal government, local aid is level funded from the prior fiscal year, and we actually not only level fund Chapter 70 aid, this is the aid to K through 12 schools, but we increase it with inflation by about $100 million. So we do all that, and we make very sizable investments in really key areas that have emerged, that have always been key, but really have emerged in the pandemic: early education, public health, mental health, nutrition, support for those who rent, and the whole issue of the whole crisis of evictions that we're seeing across the Commonwealth. So it's a pretty sizable, significant accomplishment. There was, I think, a lot of wisdom in waiting because we were actually able to pass a stronger budget that's going to, support more and more people. I do think it's really important that we look at this budget. Really, it's a 2-year chunk. So we just passed the FY21 budget, but the FY22 budget, the budget that starts July 1st, 2021, the consensus revenue hearings that make up that budget will occur just a few weeks into December. The governor will release his FY22 budget in January, and then the House and the Senate will get back on our normal trajectory. Concerned about FY22 being tougher than FY21, we have a robust stabilization account. We drew on 39% of that, so 1.5 billion of that, leaving us with the rest of that account, assuming that we're going to need to dip into that even further in FY22, especially if we see a lack of federal action on the stimulus front.
So when we talk about this budget, like you said, there's so many different areas that the state steps up to help municipalities. Let's talk a little bit about COVID first. As you mentioned, Barnstable, the town of Barnstable is really experiencing in all of Cape Cod some alarming surge numbers, and there seems to be a dearth of testing right now. So is there something in this budget that will help our communities get a handle on how many people might have COVID here?
So testing has been a real concern and something that we've anticipated in the legislative delegation for some time. In over the summer in July, we passed supplemental appropriations that included $550,000 for low barrier testing on Cape Cod, meaning people who are asymptomatic can get a test. You don't need to have sort of a doctor's note or a high level of pre-screening. We actually did that in July, and the unfortunate thing is the Baker-Polito administration was pretty slow in getting those dollars out the door. So we appropriated those dollars in July uh, for Barnstable County Department of Health and Environment. A chunk of that money was only just released last week. So had we had those dollars earlier, we could be providing more testing services. I would like to see, a low barrier testing provided to Cape Codders, akin to the Stop the Spread sites that we have in over a dozen communities across the Commonwealth. If you look at the cases, particularly in Barnstable, particularly in the Hyannis area, we've clearly seen a surge. And I think the best way for us to get on top of this is by expanding testing. Back to the budget. In the FY21 budget, I filed and secured a local priority for an additional $200,000 to come to Cape Cod for testing. So, and actually, the Barnstable County Commissioners are looking to appropriate $125,000. So, all totaled, we're looking at $875,000 in the region, almost $1 million for expanding testing options. The problem has been getting the money out the door. And it's not been helpful to have such slow movement at the state level to get these resources here. We've been trying to solve the problem ourselves, but the lack of money getting here has not been helpful. And not only have I not been happy about it, all of the delegation's been unhappy about it, and we're working to change it and to fix it. But it's definitely something that's left our communities vulnerable, and that's unfortunate. And I fear is going to mean that we will put more people at risk, and hopefully not, but I am afraid that it means we'll see more lives lost.
Going past COVID a little bit here, and you talk about some of the other budget amendments and some of the monies that are in the budget. There's so many challenges that we face as communities here on Cape Cod. What are some of the highlights? We won't keep you long because we know how busy you are, but what are some of the highlights that you've seen in the budget that will help Cape Cod as a region, as well as the town of Barnstable?
So I'm really excited about a pretty substantial increase in funding for early education. This is something that we've really heard loud and clear. Something I was concerned about sort of before the pandemic. And most working families were really sort of keenly aware of this and live this reality. But the pandemic has just revealed how crucial early education and childcare is. Yes, to make sure that we're investing in our future, but also it allows people to work. And so both budgets makes a very substantial increase in the amount of supports that goes to families, millions and millions more dollars in stipends going to families, also supports going to early education providers. So a number of the providers we have here on Cape Cod, there's about 230, give or take. A number of them were closed for several months in the spring. Some of them haven't been able to reopen. Most of these early education providers are women, many of whom are women of color, are immigrants. And so this budget provides significant investment above and beyond the traditional amount. I'm real excited about that. And I'm also looking to see how, we at a local level can move forward on expanding early education here, across Cape Cod, town by town. Mashpee provides, a level of universal pre-K that's done through their schools. Both Wellfleet and Eastham have a voucher program where families get up to $7,000 a year to help with childcare. And actually, the town of Provincetown provides early education and childcare for children as young as, I believe, 10 weeks. So we're looking at some of these local models as well to try to, move a little faster as we, if we can here, given how urgent childcare and early education is. Yes, before the pandemic, but now I think there's a newfound appreciation for the urgency and the need.
Yes, there's so many working families out there that really do need this help. It's vital to our existence here on Cape Cod to have a workforce, is to have reliable and safe childcare.
Yeah, the other big thing this budget really prioritized is assistance for housing, and whether it's programs like RAF, the Rental Assistance Program, Emergency Support for Families, really expanding by tens of millions of dollars resources that are going to help people stay in their homes. We're really worried this winter that people are going to be pushed out of their homes, and people living either in congregate settings or who are homeless. That's not that's even more efficient for COVID-19 to spread. And we also need to get a little support and help, particularly for smaller scale landlords who maybe their tenants haven't been able to pay. So a big expansion there as well.
And anything on the environment, we've talked about climate change. We've had earthquakes and tornadoes. Uh, just recently, last week was another tornado warning here on Cape Cod. But when we look at the environment and some of the things, the initiatives that are out there, is there anything in the budget that is addressing some of those climate change and some of those environmental challenges?
So traditionally, when we have, you know, a challenging fiscal environment, and this is probably among the most challenging environments you can imagine. You know, you think back to the Great Recession, when environmental line items and accounts were reduced significantly. There was significant layoffs in environmental agencies, that just the resources there were just decimated. And so it's not a big shiny new item, but just the fact that we're able to provide maintenance level funding for all of the environmental accounts in the budget is a huge victory. Actually, as we speak, there's still a conference committee trying to reconcile legislation that both the Senate and the House passed to put Massachusetts on a path to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. That is going to be hopefully reconciled by the end of the month, by the end of December here. It would be a huge accomplishment when we get this done. Massachusetts would be a leader. It's, if you look at the bill the Senate passed back actually last January 2020, before the world turned on its head, and we before we realized what a year 2020 would be. So we passed this law. If that law went into effect in the Senate, that the Senate passed, it would arguably be the most aggressive legislation to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050 that any legislative body would have passed in the country. So excited for that, looking forward to that. We've also got conference committees out there on healthcare, which I'm serving on that conference committee, transportation, economic development. So we're still working hard, trying to get support, and the next legislative session is going to start right up in early January. So it'll be a busy time, but this is a time we're trying to keep, you know, all hands on deck, working as hard as we can. I'm really concerned about the cases we're seeing here, the trends really urging, you know, people to continue to socially distance, to wear masks, and particularly to be very vigilant in those most intimate, sort of small social settings. That's where we're seeing COVID-19 transmitted. It's not necessarily happening when people are sort of out and about in public and wearing masks. It's difficult for COVID-19 to transmit that way. But you know, we're past one holiday, and with the rest of the holidays, you know, before us, I know that temptation is really there, and you want to be with and spend time with and commune with and unwind with loved ones. It's been a year, but we're really needing people to, you know, only be socializing in that way with the people you live with in your immediate family. And you know, look, we're fortunate to live in this beautiful, wonderful place. You know, get outside, you know, and enjoy a walk with a loved one, or keeping it outdoors, even though the weather's much colder, I think is definitely the way to go to reduce risk of COVID-19 transmission.
Well, we certainly hope that folks heed your advice. We are pounding the drum as well here at the town of Barnstable to get people to understand that this really literally is much worse than it was this spring. There's more cases in our town than we had pretty much all through March, April, and May. So
Yeah,
it's important that people really listen to this message.
and if you look at the cases that we had in, you know, in that first surge, many of them, you know, really tragically, but many of them were concentrated in skilled nursing facilities, or in other congregate living facilities. That's not how we're seeing the cases now. Most of the cases are community spread that are occurring when, you know, a group of people get together and in private socializing. You know, the demographic is a little younger, so hopefully that's going to mean slightly less hospitalizations. But I really worry for what, particularly just coming off of the Thanksgiving holiday that we just had, you know, that in just a week or two, maybe three, just in time for Christmas, we're going to see a horrible surge in hospitalizations and also deaths. And so, really asking everyone right now, this is probably the most vulnerable period at least from a Cape Cod perspective, that we've ever been in this pandemic. And so now is the time to be vigilant, to take personal responsibility, to do everything you can to reduce your risk. And also don't forget to reach out to others, right? This is a really difficult time. I think all of our mental health is certainly stretched here. And we're fortunate to be able to reach out. Even this interview we're doing, Paula, right? We're
Right.
in the old days, right? Pre-pandemic, I'd come down into the studio, we'd record. Now you're doing this from your home. I'm doing it from my home. God bless the iPhone and Wi-Fi, I guess. But this is
Right.
this is a trying time. So really, urging people to be gentle with yourself, to take precautions, and to be vigilant.
We thank you so much for your time.